podcast for fundraising operations professionals. Hosted by Fund Minor co-founders Chelsea Lamego and Alejandro Stevenson Duran. In this episode, we explore the three evils of advancement and learn strategies to overcome them.
Welcome to the Impact Unplugged podcasts. We are your hosts, Chelsea Lamego
and Alejandro. Tune into the Impact Unplugged podcast, where we share advancement and nonprofit best practices and trends from industry experts like Jesse.
Today, we have the honor of interviewing Dr. Jesse Pisors. Dr. Pisors is the president of Pasco-Hernando State College, which offers over 90 academic programs and serves over 9,000 students across their 5 campuses just north of Tampa Bay, Florida. Dr. Pisors has spent over 25 years in leadership positions in higher education. He served as Vice President for Advancement at the Texas A&M University San Antonio campus and University of Houston, Victoria, before moving to Florida and becoming president at Pasco-Hernando State. Excited to interview you today, Jesse. Of course, you and I have known each other for several years now and met through the Council for Aid and Support of Education, various initiatives. We, I think, at some point served on a conference committee together, potentially on a cabinet together there, and have really gotten to know each other over the years and seen each other at many different conferences at this point in time. So excited to share your valuable expertise with our audience today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. This is an exciting podcast. It's a great initiative. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, it's just fun to talk about advancement. As a president now and formerly an advancement vice president, that's my background. That's where I come from, and it's near and dear to my heart. So it's fun to dive into that and really look forward to this conversation.
Love it. And thanks for spending time with us. And of course, let's get right into business. I think you might know that many of our listeners do come from that advancement background. So let's get started with you sharing any big surprises or unexpected learnings that you had to go through coming in from being an advancement vice president and now serving, of course, as a president in your organization.
Sure. It has been an amazing transformation. I had the incredible honor of becoming the president here effective February 1st, 2024. So it's been a little while, long enough to still be the new guy, but not play that card every day. That's what I tell people. But yeah, coming from the advancement side, you know, as a vice president, reporting to a president on a cabinet for the 8 or 9 years before becoming president, it was interesting because I thought I understood the presidency quite well. I worked closely with the president, as most VPs of advancement would, and I thought I had a real sense of what the job was, but I did not fully appreciate how complex it was and just how many different things the president has coming at them at any given time. You know, on the one hand, as a surprise, just to be really candid to the listeners, it is nice to be able to delegate so much. So every task that comes to the president actually has probably somebody other than the president who should be doing it. So almost everything that comes your way is really not yours to do. And if you step in and do it, you may actually kind of be creating some kind of challenge. So in most cases, it's about wisely knowing where to deflect that. Where does that need to go to? Is that the CFO? Is that the chief of staff? Is that government relations? Where does that really need to go? And yet, on the other hand, there's so much volume of that it's just a lot to handle. So you have these, at least I'm fortunate to have this incredible team around me. They're there to help, they're there to support, but it's just a lot of incoming. So I think, you know, as a VP, I think I looked at presidents and did not have enough of an appreciation of the volume of things they had coming at them. And I couldn't understand why they didn't remember the bio I had given them on a major donor prospect 3 meetings ago. I mean, I gave it to them. We talked about it. Why don't they remember it? So I am sympathetic now, but I wasn't as much as I probably should have been back then. So a number of surprises, but that's one of them for sure.
Well, there's no doubt that these organizations have a lot of moving parts. There are varied needs across the organization, varied goals across the organization. There's a big mission across the organization. And one thing that I have found is I think as an advancement team, it's a big strategic advantage if you can get your advancement team to really understand some of these varied goals across the organization and what the achieving the strategic mission of the organization looks like. So curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think, part of what I'm going to say is common knowledge to advancement professionals, but I can say from the vantage point of being a president, I see it as even more true than I probably thought it was before in, 100% in the world of advancement. And that is that donors don't give to the advancement division. Okay, they're not trying to support the advancement department, right? They're wanting to support the mission of the college or university. They're trying to support the students who study there, the faculty who research there, the work and the mission of that institution. So the advancement shop is the vehicle by which we connect donors and their passions with the needs and the mission of the institution. And we have to really keep that clearly in mind. So, I think there's the big mission picture. So there's the world of academic affairs where you're about research, you're about teaching, you're about learning. And as a president, I get to stay closer to that than I did as a VP of advancement. Because let's face it, I just was not in that space on a regular basis or on a frequent basis. Then there's the area of student affairs and student support services. How do we support students? How do we help them be successful? That's core to the mission. And again, a place where I tried to spend time in advancement, but I really wasn't there very much. Then there's the whole finance and administration side. So this is the side of the house that how do we manage funds? How do we process things? How do we work through the different layers of the organization? And I think that's where, and that's actually where our conversation will lead a little bit, is how to logistically get through those things. And again, as an advancement VP, I thought, listen, we bring in $100,000 gift, we bring in $1 million gift, we bring in a $25,000 gift, and there it is. I mean, there it is. Let's spend it. It should be easy. And I don't think I had the appreciation for the world of the CFO, if you will, the way I do now. So it is a lot more complicated, and yet, the mission really is what unifies the divisions. And I notice that when I'm leading cabinet meetings. I've got my VP of advancement who does an incredible job leading fundraising efforts, managing a foundation, doing all that. Have the CFO, the vice president of student affairs, the chief academic officer. And even though each one of those individuals has the area they're responsible for, they really are focused on the excellence of that area. But we really are united when we say, we got to get students in the door. We got to help them be successful. We got to help them graduate. And it's amazing how that just automatically brings us together, because now it's like, okay, how do we do that in teaching and learning? How do we do that in student support services? How can we raise money for that? And so the mission should always be the unifying factor among the diverse divisions and functions and departments of a college or university. And the more you can circle back to that, whatever your division is, whether it's advancement or business affairs or academic affairs, if you can circle back to that, you will, in doing so, find unity with your colleagues. And to the extent that you stray from that, or you sort of just forget about it or set it aside for a minute, that's when you can get some frictions and divisions. So the mission is the big unifier. And I've been able to sort of see that from the president's seat a little bit better.
I really love that perspective. And it's true that if we all can unify around the same mission, we're all working towards supporting each other in achieving that mission. And as advancement professionals, we are largely a service unit. As you mentioned, we're raising funding for the rest of the organization to deploy toward that mission. And oftentimes, advancement professionals are dealing with very complex things that are not always advancement related. And so understanding how you can cooperate and collaborate and support and work with these different units is really where the magic happens, and you can best provide that service to all of your campus partners. And I truly believe that in developing strong relationships with campus partners as advancement professionals and truly understanding how we can all work together to support that ultimate unified mission is how we can best serve our donors and our community.
Just to jump in there, Chelsea, I was thinking, one of the key ways that I think that happens in a practical sense is advancement leaders need to be in the room with their non-advancement colleagues. And that could be a cabinet meeting, it could be task force, could be committees, could be other contexts, could be virtual. But I think there's a temptation as a chief advancement officer to dedicate as much of our time as possible externally to donors, to prospective donors, to alumni. And obviously that's important, but it's really easy to get a bit of a drift between you and the CFO, you and the provost, you and the deans. You have to work hard for that not to happen. And the best way for that not to happen is be in the room, be present, be at those meetings. If the faculty senate invites you to come speak to them and join them for an event, be there. You need that time. They need the time with you. You need the time with them. And that's partly true for you personally. It's also true because of the team that you lead. Because now when you get back to your advancement shop and your leadership role in advancement, you'll be able to bring that perspective that you got in that faculty senate breakfast. You'll bring the perspective that you got from the cabinet meeting, from the strategic planning meeting in student affairs. So put yourself out there, be engaged outside of advancement with the other divisions of the institution. And I think that's going to be key exactly for what you were talking about of understanding and just making sure there's clear bridges and connectors there.
I love that, Jesse, and thank you for sharing. I particularly enjoy your thought process around how truly the mission of that college or the university is the glue that ties everything together, and even as we're talking about bridges. Curious to get your perspective as far as, what's is there any secret sauce or magic in really constructing the right mission and culture around that mission? Is there something that you want to share with the audience, particularly in very changing times, and there's conversations around, hey, missions should be prevailing against time. Curious to get your thoughts overall on how to create that perfect mission for your type of organization, how that stands the test of time.
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate that, Alejandro. When I came in as president, we were actually entering the last year of our current strategic plan for Pasco-Hernando State College. So at the end of this calendar year of 2024, we wrap up our current strategic plan. And so that means we have until the end of the calendar year to develop the next iteration of our strategic plan, which in our case will probably be a 5-year iteration. That's pretty standard. And so what I had to do pretty quickly after taking over in early February was begin to evaluate how we were going to approach that process. And fortunately, I've had a lot of good mentors in other presidents who I think have done a great job with this. But, we put together a steering committee. We put together, subcommittees and goal committees. And, we agreed that we were going to take a hard look at the mission statement and the vision statement of our institution and just ask ourselves, do we need to change this? The answer is not necessarily yes. We may come back and say, no, it's just good the way it is. Or we may say we need a minor change or a major change, but we are at least opening ourselves up to that question. So I guess I would begin the answer by saying at least every 3 or 5 years, I think you just need to have an honest, open question that says, is this the right mission statement? Is this the right vision statement? Just because it's been right for the last 75 or 100 years does not or even 5 years, does not necessarily mean it's right today. And if it truly stands the test of time, wonderful, then it is. Carry on, right? And then the other side of it, the more granular side, the goals, usually institutions will have a major goal statement around academics, another around student support or student affairs, another around infrastructure resources, and hopefully one around advancement and external support in some kind. I won't go into all details, but I'll give you this one little tidbit of, I think, one thing that's been key. So we have 5 goal committees, five goal areas: academics, student affairs, enrollment, resources and infrastructure, and advancement. And each one of those committees is a pretty large committees. We have about 10 to 15 members on every committee. And we spent quite a few hours as a steering committee and as a cabinet evaluating the membership of that committee to make sure it was truly representational of the institution. So we asked ourselves, and Chelsea, you mentioned in my introduction, we have 5 campuses. Okay, so it's pretty important to make sure we're representing all 5 campuses. One college, 5 campuses. Okay, what about the academic divisions? Were we representing the academic divisions? Did we have roughly equitable representation of faculty versus staff? What about staff and faculty who were newer versus those who had been around for a long time? We didn't just want to have people who'd been here less than 5 years. We also didn't want to just have people who'd been here over 20 years. Then we wanted to look organizationally. A lot of times strategic planning groups only have people at the senior director level and up, and they exclude people with frontline engagement with students and other staff. So we made sure we had people from frontline positions all the way up to senior executive positions. And what we called it was 6 lenses of representation. All the different ways that we needed to make sure the entire institution was represented as we began this process of saying, what are the goals we need to have? What are the objectives underneath those we need to have for the next 5 years? And what, if anything, do we need to tweak in our mission and vision statements? We have 72 people right now on those 5 committees. That is a lot of people. That is a lot of scheduling and a lot of work. But it's worth it because when we're done with the process, we'll be able to say this process really represented all of our institution, students, community partners, alumni, external people, all the internal folks. So those are just some quick thoughts, but start with having really, really good representation. Because if you get halfway through and you realize, oh my, we don't have much representation from our nursing or health sciences area, it's really too late because the first half of that body of work now doesn't have that voice. And you got to get that right at the beginning. You can't try to fix it later on. So I think that's at least one important aspect.
Love that, Jesse. Thank you for sharing. And you're preaching to the choir. I'm glad to hear that perspective on, even with something as abstract as, building a mission and vision statement. I like that you're resorting to also data for another signal as to, hey, how does the distribution look like in the organization, and help that drive your decision around what's the right strategy for mission and vision. So even having that as a data backed, it being so abstract, I'm glad to hear that. So thanks for sharing.
Right.
So, Jesse, we've been talking about all of the many different departments and units and areas that are involved at a higher education institution. And largely in advancement, we also, talked about how we are a service unit and we're supporting the rest of all of these different units and departments and divisions across sometimes one campus, sometimes multiple locations and campuses, like in your case. So it requires a ton of collaboration. There are a lot of processes. Our advancement teams are relying on the support and collaboration from all of these different units. And so one of the things at FundMiner that we focus on is ensuring that folks across the organization have access to the information that they need in order to be effective stewards of donor funding. And when we think about this, of course, the advancement team is building relationships with donors, raising money for all of these different initiatives that support various areas across the organization. But we really rely on our campus partners, like our head of the accounting department, or the dean of engineering, or our football coach, or the head of scholarships, who are actually deploying this capital and delivering that impact that our donors are giving funding to support. So when you and I first started talking about the work we're doing at FundMiner, you sort of jokingly talked about the 3 evils of advancement, and it's actually very valid. And so I'd love to dive into these. Tell us a little bit about what these 3 evils of advancement are, and let's dive into those.
Yeah, Chelsea, I remember when we prepared for this, refresh my memory. It was a Case District 4 conference, and we were sitting there in the margins of those sessions. And somehow that just kind of we came to that, and it came from talking about FundMiner, and it came from talking about the solutions. If you say this is the solution, you have to say, what is the problem? What is the problem we're trying to solve here, right? So I think that's where my mind went. Okay, you're talking about a solution. What's the problem? And to use a more colorful term, I said evils, right? And three seemed to be a good one, but they're very serious, and they're things that if you've worked any amount of time in advancement, you've seen them. You've seen challenges with them, and you've probably seen significant challenges with at least 2 out of 3. And I would say, the first one is pretty simply a donor gives money, gives funds, and that which they have given is not used or spent in a timely fashion. So you went out to a donor as a fundraiser, and you said something to the effect of, we really need money for engineering scholarships. We have a great program, but our students need scholarship support. Okay, I'm going to give you $50,000 to help with that. A year later, the $50,000 is sitting there untouched. So, okay, that's a problem, right, to me as a donor. The second one is, you said you needed money for engineering scholarships. I gave $50,000, and it turned out you used it to build the engineering lab. And that's related to engineering, but I thought you said scholarships, and I thought that's what I said I was giving for. So you spent it, but it wasn't for what I intended it to be spent for. And then the third one is, you spent it on scholarships, you spent it quickly, but I never really heard back what the impact was. I may have been on an annual report mailing list, so I got something. I'm probably invited to everything. I get regular thank yous, but I didn't specifically hear $50,000 went to engineering student scholarships. And because of that, these students were able to graduate on time. They're en route to great jobs. I never heard that impact. And let's face it, the reason I gave was for the impact. The reason I gave was not to be invited to the lunch. I appreciate that. It was not for the thank you card, though I appreciate it. It was because I wanted to make a difference in engineering students' lives. And so I never heard back. So those are really those three things. One, the funds that are given are not spent in a timely fashion. Number two, they're spent in a way that is not consistent with what the intentions of the donor were. And number three, they're spent in a timely and correct fashion, but I don't get the impact as the donor. I never hear what the impact was. And if we fail on any one of those three things, it's actually a pretty significant failure in the eyes of the donors. And I know with my years in advancement, I saw my shops at one point or another with one fund or another struggle on any one of those 3 points.
Thank you for sharing that, Jesse. And I think those 3 evils, I'm imagining a nice printed T-shirt now that has those as zingers. They do have something to them, and I think these 3 evils that you've described, they make a lot of sense. And one of the things that even from an outsider might not make sense is why is this so prevalent, right? There's 3 evils, and you mentioned how most organizations are facing real difficulties with at least one of these 3. What do you have to say to that? What are some of the reasons of why these organizations struggle with these 3 evils?
Yeah. Well, to keep with my colorful terminology, I'll go to something also that Chelsea that I said before, and in advancement, you have sins or errors of commission and omission, right? You have things that you might do wrong that you really shouldn't do, right? You have things that, right? But there are also mistakes that you can make in advancement that are just things you miss, things you should have done, but you failed to do. And you probably didn't fail to do them because you deliberately failed to do them. You just missed it. It just was an oversight. It just, you thought somebody else was doing it. They weren't doing it. They thought you were doing it. It was just missed. And I think that's really where most of these 3 evils sort of lie. So it's not that we got the $50,000. We were very excited for these engineering students. And then we deliberately said, we're not going to spend it. We're going to put it in an account and just sit on it. No one thought that. No one decided that. That was never the plan. So that's an important thing to clarify, because I think if people are hearing this, they would think, well, I didn't, you can be defensive, but it's not about somebody deciding to do the wrong thing. It's how do these things kind of accidentally happen? And just to pick on that first one, they happen because we have hundreds, thousands of donors. We have dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of funds. We have dozens, hundreds, thousands of gift agreements. And Chelsea, you're smiling because, this goes back to the very beginning of FundMiner. And, there in your work and advancement services, you've seen this and we've seen this. Anybody in advancement has seen all the gift agreements, each one with their own little set of criteria. We try to make them templates. We try to make them, have some consistency, but we struggle with that because every donor has their own preferences. And somehow at that point, things kind of break down. The other thing, and this goes back to the intradivisional element of institutions, right? Let's say the advancement shop has really got it figured out. We have a monitoring system where every month we're going to check back and see if this fund is being used. But let's face it, if we're not interfacing correctly with business affairs, with the accounting department, with financial aid that's actually awarding scholarships, there's going to be a breakdown. We can't do this on our own. We're typically not putting scholarship money in students' accounts, right? It's usually financial aid that's doing that. And so if that link or that bridge isn't working, we're going to have a problem. I'll give you a good example where I work now. We have a great person in our advancement shop, and about 50% of her work is actually in financial aid, but she is a foundation employee. And it's so that she can liaise very, very closely with her colleagues in financial aid to make sure that the hundreds of foundation funded scholarships are properly awarded in a timely fashion. But if you don't have a system that bridges that, and many of us don't, or at least we don't have one that works really well, we're going to have a breakdown. So the failure happens not because somebody decided not to do something that they should have done. The failure usually happens because we just missed it. The volume overwhelms us. The multiple people and departments involved overwhelm us. And the work overwhelms us. And before we know it, months have gone by. We've gone on to 6 different gifts. And frankly, we've kind of forgotten about that until we get the dreaded phone call from the donor. And at first, we just think they're calling because they like us. And then they're like, hey, I never heard back. And we're like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Right?
I love that. And before we get into that, because I do want to double click on that phone call and what are some of the consequences around, when this happens. But I want to take a moment to also pause and really, I really appreciate the candidness around, hey, this is a problem that is around the entire industry and organizations. And this is not an issue of, you talked about omission and commission and saying like all of these are just symptoms of an administrative challenge that is present around organizations. And I think it's really important for the audience to hear that, because oftentimes we, this is not something that folks will say proudly, like, oh, we do not use X% of the funds, or hey, we do not have a good grasp as far as honoring that donor intent. But really, this is a problem that is not only prevalent across higher ed institutions, but once you pass a certain threshold around any fundraising organization and that you're raising enough money, you bet these administrative challenges are very much present. And, organizations' ability to deal with that and understand where they are is an important thing, especially when they're able to have an open conversation around people in the industry and say, hey, we have this problem too. And this is raise your hand, and this is what helped us, get our ducks in a row.
Yeah. Automation and systems are things that are designed in organizations to serve clients, customers, or in our case, donors better. Okay. If you have good systems, you protect yourself, at least to some extent, from human error. So to your very good point, Alejandro, the reality is any organization that is more than, 3 or 4 of us working together in a little shop, which all of our institutions are much bigger than that, those complexities are threats to taking care of our donors. And I think that's an important point to just pause on. the complexity that defines any college or university is a threat to great donor stewardship. It doesn't mean it has to torpedo it, but
Mhm.
it stands there as a threat. So how do we overcome it, right? And I think we have to go into it accepting. And another thing that I thought of as you were asking that is, just as people, I think there's a risk that we all in our respective roles can kind of get defensive of, well, I didn't mean to do that, or I thought this was taken care of. But the many interacting parts and positions and functions are just kind of set up to where you're going to have an occasional error. If you have 1,000 gift agreements, which in a big shop is not uncommon to have, if you combine endowment funds,
Mhm.
non-endowed funds, you might have 500 to 1,000 agreements. And that's not counting the really big shops that go a lot bigger than that. There almost is just no way that without some kind of system, without some kind of automation, you can really say you're keeping up with those. The money's being spent in a timely fashion. The money is being spent as the donor intended, and the impact report is getting back to the donor. That's probably not happening if I'm just coming into work every day and my job is to keep up with 1,117 gift agreements with 2 new ones coming in every day. Not going to happen,
Yeah.
probably. So,
And one thing I want to call out too is, there's always the option of hiring a bunch of people who can manually pull this together and have all these conversations. But that's a really expensive way to solve the problem. And when you're talking about people, it's much more beneficial to have the people on your team on the front line, really building those relationships with donors, having conversations, focusing on the human connection and the human component versus pushing out data, running processes that can really be automated. But certainly, Jesse, to your point, you've got to have the controls and checks and balances in place because due to the natural complexity of these organizations, it's just bound to happen and things are bound to fall through the cracks. So it's all the more important that we have tight processes that we regularly review and update to.
You brought up a great point, and I'm gonna give a shout out to a friend of mine, Brooks Hull, the vice president for advancement at Texas State University. I'll never forget when we were in a conversation. This was a while ago. We were talking about AI and advancement. So AI is still new-ish, but back then it was really new, and we were just kind of kicking around, a bunch of us, how this would actually affect us. And he said something that was powerful, and I think stands the test of time, and it relates to other forms of automation too. He said, I want to spend as much of my time as possible out there with donors, out there building relationships, out there stewarding people. I want to be face to face across a table with a cup of coffee, whatever the case is, with people who are invested in the organization. That person to person time, that is where we as advancement professionals shine. That's where we do the best. And therefore, to your very good point, that's where we want our time to be invested and our people resources to be invested. It's not that people couldn't do the automated work of keeping up with 1,000 plus gift agreements and hundreds of different funds. They could, but you made a great point. Is that the best use of their time? And a fundamental principle as an advancement is we are people, right? We're relationship people. We're good at and we enjoy connecting with people, connecting them with their institution. So let's, as human beings, do what we're good at and do what, to some extent, we can only do, and figure out a way to let the machines do other things that are less valuable uses of our time.
Well said.
Love that, Jesse. What do you think, when an organization is able to effectively leverage, tools and also has their ducks in a row, even from a mission and vision statement? So going back to the early conversation that we had, what are some of the things that you think happen from an advancement standpoint when things are going right? And when those three evils are properly mitigated, especially,
Right.
what are some of the after effects that you see perhaps immediately and perhaps a couple of years down the road?
Yeah. When we have vanquished the evil monsters from our shops, it's an interesting thing because, I sort of hate to say this, but most donors are used to having the nonprofits they support fail to some extent on one of those three things. It's kind of too bad that I would have to say that, but I think anybody listening who regularly or with any kind of frequency supports, say, 5 or more organizations at any level, even at a small level, and they would ask themselves, do I know that my gift is being spent in a timely fashion? Do I know that it's being spent for the purpose I donated? And then am I getting a really clear impact report of what my gift did? And if you ask those three questions about every organization that you support at all, I'm pretty sure you're not going to get across the board, yes, they're all, hitting on all cylinders on all that. I don't think so. So what that means is, if my institution, if Pasco-Hernando State College, if we can actually do all three of those things well with you, Alejandro, as a donor, you will pretty soon begin to compare us to the other nonprofits that you support, and you'll say, wow, PHSC, they clearly are, using the money. It's making a difference. I'm finding out about it. And you'll begin to think comparatively. And you'll say, that's better than the other organizations. I maybe am going to stop giving to this other one. I'm going to give a little bit more to PHSC because they obviously need the money. They use it. They steward it, and they let me know how it's going. I'll add a little footnote on the impact reporting. I think that we are better at showing appreciation than we are at showing impact. Appreciation is very important. I don't want to take away from that. A sincere thank you. We appreciate it. That's important, and that makes a difference, whether that's in a phone call, a meeting, a card, etc. But it is not the same and does not take the place of impact reporting. Because if I just say thank you for your gift, Alejandro, that's good. You want to hear that, but you also want to know, what did my gift do? Who did it help? How did it help them? Yep. And if you get both of those things, again, we're going to beat probably, several of the other, kind of nonprofits. There is a competition, and that may sound harsh, but in every donor's mind, there is a ranking of how well they are treated and how well their gift is treated by the various organizations that they support. And you want to work to make sure your organization is at the top of that list. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Jesse, if there's one thing that we've certainly uncovered in our conversation today, it's that there are a lot of moving parts when it comes to these educational organizations, other types of fundraising organizations, and specifically the responsibility of the Advancement Office to collaborate and work across all of these different moving parts. And it's also just critically important and really at the core and fundamental to the work that we do in advancement, that we ask the questions, have the conversations with donors, make sure that we fully understand, to begin with, what their donor intent is when they're making a gift, that it's properly documented, that we properly execute on that gift, that we show appreciation, and at the end, that we're also sharing the impact. And I love that you called out the difference between appreciation and impact. And there's a lot of missed opportunity in our industry with, as you mentioned, focusing on the impact piece. I like to think about some of the organizations that I've given to in the past, and those that I feel the closest with are certainly those that I truly understand where my dollars are going and the change that those dollars are making. So tremendous opportunity for our advancement colleagues to hone in on this area. And Jesse, we really can't thank you enough for sharing your story and expert insights today. Any last topics coming to mind that you want to share with our listeners? Maybe something special that, looking back to your days as a VP for advancement and considering where you are now as a president, maybe something that you wish you would have been thinking about then that you're thinking about now.
Well, I will give you two closing thoughts. One is a bit more, it's sort of a positive take. Alejandro, we referred earlier to sort of getting that phone call where a donor asks, why haven't I heard from you? Why wasn't the money spent or something? And even though that is a an unfortunate call to get if it comes. Good advancement professionals know that you can often turn those moments into something positive. If you respond well, if you apologize, if an apology is in order, if you correct the matter, you follow back up to show how they were corrected. Sometimes correcting a mistake with a donor can get you closer to that donor than you would have been if you would have done everything right all along. Now, don't take that as make mistakes deliberately, of course, but it is fascinating how that can happen. You can turn that on its head. So if, as an advancement leader, you encounter those moments where you just have to admit you haven't been quite right with the donor in some way, you have to fix it, you can actually improve the relationship you have with them through that process. They will respect and appreciate it. Turning to another topic a little bit in closing, I think one thing that I know now as a president, I sort of wish I would have known as an advancement leader is, and I'll speak directly to advancement leaders, especially those who report directly to presidents, give your presidents very specific tasks to do. So if you want them to send a thank you letter to this person for this gift this week, be very specific about it. Ask them to do that. They thrive on that. They will knock that out, get that done. What they might have a hard time doing is sort of, okay, you're going to steward these 10 donors. Okay, I'm trying to get ready to present the budget to the board with the CFO. I'm not sure I'm going to remember this, but if you just say, hey, we need to get a thank you letter from you to this donor this week, we can do that. So give us very specific instructions and we'll respond well to that. I would hope. I know I do. But this is exciting. I appreciate it. It's been really fun to talk about all this.
Yes, thank you so much, Jesse. You've really provided us with some amazing insight today, and we were really glad to have hosted you on our podcast. So thanks again. If our listeners want to reach out to you, where would be a good place, or what's a good way to get in touch with you?
I think just look up my name on LinkedIn. I love to connect that way. Message me. That's where I spend a lot of time. So I would say just look me up that way, and I'd love to connect. And I do want to say, Chelsea and Alejandro, it is an absolute honor to be on this podcast. So I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate being asked, and really, really have enjoyed the conversation.
Well, thank you again, Jesse, so much. And to our listeners, thank you all for tuning in. Do keep an eye out for more episodes of the Impact Unplugged podcast, where you'll hear insights from experts just like Dr. Pisors. And super excited to hopefully see you again sometime soon at an upcoming conference.
If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. And remember, for more great content and insights, visit our website at www.fundminer.com and follow us on LinkedIn.
That's a wrap for today. Until next time, keep maximizing your impact.